Her fingers would not stop trembling. Not from the cold, though the cold was brutal that morning, the kind that bites straight through wool and settles deep in the bones. No, her hands shook because of what she was holding. A small piece of paper, half buried in ice, nailed to a post at the edge of a road that had no name and led to a town she had never been to before. She had to claw at the frozen edges just to pull it free, and when she finally did, the corners crumbled in her grip like they had been waiting too long for someone to find them. She read it once, then again, then a third time, the way you read something you're almost afraid to believe. Wanted, a cook for the winter season. Room, board, and honest wages. Inquire at Harlow Creek Ranch. Ask for Daniel Whitfield. She stood there in the middle of that empty road, the wind screaming past her ears, her shawl pressed flat against her chest, and she read those words over and over until they stopped looking like words and started looking like something else entirely. Something she had not seen in a very long time. A door. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Her name was May Larkin, and if you had seen her standing there that morning, you would have thought she was just a tired woman on a cold road. You would not have known what she was carrying. You would not have known what she was running from. You would not have seen the bruise hidden beneath the collar of her dress, or the way she kept glancing back over her shoulder at the road behind her, watching, always watching, the way a person watches when they know something is following them and they just cannot see it yet. Behind her, inside a wagon that had seen far better days, 3 children sat huddled together beneath 2 thin blankets that were doing almost nothing to fight the cold. Their breath rose in little white clouds, each one disappearing before it could go anywhere, like small prayers dissolving before they reached heaven. The oldest boy, Thomas, was 11 years old, but his eyes were the eyes of a man who had already lived a hard life and knew it. He sat with his arm around his younger sister, Clara, who was 7 and had not spoken a single word in 3 days. Not since the night everything changed. Not since the night May had grabbed her children in the dark, thrown what she could into that wagon, and driven away from the only home they had ever known. The youngest was a boy named Eli. He was only 5. He was asleep, curled up against Clara's side with his cheek pressed to her arm, and even in sleep his little face was tight, like he was dreaming something that scared him. There was a bruise on his forehead, yellowing now, fading slowly from purple to the color of old grief. May's eyes went to that bruise every few minutes, like a tongue finding a sore tooth. She could not stop looking at it. She could not stop remembering how it got there. 4 nights ago, her husband had thrown her child against a wall. That was the night May Larkin stopped surviving and started running. She had spent years telling herself it would get better. Years making herself smaller, quieter, less of a target. Years flinching at the sound of his boots on the floorboards and learning which silences were safe and which ones were not. Years of explaining bruises to neighbors and lies to herself. But when she heard the sound of Eli hitting that wall, when she heard the silence after, that horrible second of silence before he started to cry, something inside her broke open. Not broke down, broke open, like a dam giving way, like a door that had been locked for so long that everyone forgot there was a room behind it. She did not plan it. She did not think. She simply moved. She grabbed the children. She grabbed what she could, and she ran. May pressed that folded notice against her chest and closed her eyes for just a moment. The wind pulled at her hair. The cold ached in her jaw. She thought about the man whose name was on that paper. She thought about whether he would take one look at her 3 children and turn her away. She thought about whether the job was still available or whether she had found this notice too late, which was the story of her life lately, finding everything just a little too late. But she had nowhere else to go, and so she tucked the paper inside her coat, right against her heart, and she turned back to the wagon. Thomas was already watching her. He always was. "Mama," he said. His voice was careful, measured, the voice of a boy who had learned to speak quietly. "Did you find something?" Maybe May said. She climbed back onto the wagon seat and picked up the reins. "Get closer to your brother and sister. Share the blankets." He did not ask more questions. That was the thing about Thomas that broke May's heart just a little more every day. He was 11 years old, and he had already learned that some questions were better left unasked. The road to Harlow Creek Ranch took more than 4 hours through wind and driving snow. The old mule stumbled twice on icy ground, and May's arms ached from holding the reins steady. She did not let herself think about warmth. She did not let herself think about failure. She thought only about the next mile, then the next, then the one after that. Clara sat silent the whole way, her eyes open but far away, watching something no one else could see. May glanced back at her every so often, and each time she did, a fresh wave of something fierce and desperate rose in her chest. That little girl had not made a sound since the night Eli got hurt. Not a word, not a cry, not even a whisper. She just watched, quiet and still, like a candle that had been blown out but was still warm. When the ranch finally appeared through the gray curtain of falling snow, May felt her breath catch. There was smoke coming from a chimney. Real smoke, thick and steady, curling up into the white sky like it had been there for years and intended to keep going. The house was solid, weathered, yes, old timber and stone, but standing firm against the cold the way a good house does, the way a house feels when someone has lived in it long enough to love it. There was a barn to one side and a split-rail fence running the length of the property, and through the snow she could see lantern light glowing orange in the barn doorway. Warmth, life, the possibility of shelter. May stopped the wagon at the gate and sat very still. A man came out of the barn. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that comes from years of actual work rather than just the idea of it. His coat was worn and his hat was pulled low against the wind. And when he walked toward them, he walked with a steadiness that reminded May of old timber, something that had been tested by weather and was still standing. His face, when he got close enough for her to see it, was all hard lines and deep-set eyes, the face of a man who had known loss and carried it quietly. Not a cruel face, not a soft one either, something in between. He stopped a few feet from the wagon and looked up at her. "Ma'am," he said, "you need directions?" "No, sir." May's voice came out steadier than she expected. She lifted her chin just slightly, the way she had practiced in her head 100 times on the road over. "I saw you notice in town. You're looking for a cook." His eyes moved to the children, then back to her. "Notice said one person," he said. His tone was not unkind, just honest. I know what it said. Her chest was so tight it was hard to breathe, but she kept her voice level. "My children are not trouble. They're quiet and they work hard, and I will cook and clean from the first light to the last. I don't complain, and I don't ask for things I haven't earned." He studied her. The wind moved between them. "Where's your husband?" he asked. She had practiced this too. The lie was smooth and cold, like a stone she had been carrying in her pocket for days. "Gone," she said. "Fever took him 6 months ago." The word tasted wrong in her mouth, like something you say to survive. The man was quiet for a moment. He looked again at Eli's small sleeping form, at Thomas standing straight and serious in the wagon bed, at Clara's empty eyes. Something moved across his face, something that looked like recognition, like a man who understood, on some level he could not fully name, what it meant to look at a person and see they had nothing left to lose. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said finally. "Thank you," May said. Her voice almost broke on those 2 words. She pulled it back together. "Please, just the winter. I'll take any corner of that barn. Just don't send us back out in this cold." The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped to the side and nodded toward the house. "Barn's no place for children," he said. "You'll come inside. Name's Daniel. Daniel Whitfield. Let's get you warm before this storm gets worse." And May Larkin, who had not cried once since the night she ran, who had held herself together with nothing but wire and willpower across 4 days of frozen roads and fear, felt something crack quietly behind her ribs. She didn't cry. Not yet. But oh, she was so close. If you're still with me right now, just stop for 1 second and take a breath, because I need you to know that what you just heard is only the beginning. May thought she had finally found a door. She did not yet know what was waiting on the other side of it. She did not know that the worst was not behind her. She did not know that the man she ran from was already looking. Stay with me, because this story is about to get so much harder before it gets better. May got the children inside. She got them warm. She thought, for one fragile, trembling moment, that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right. Then a letter arrived. No name, no return address. Just one sentence written in handwriting she knew better than her own. I know where you are. Don't go anywhere. Part 2 is coming, and you're not ready for what happens next. The house was small. There was a fire going low on the hearth, and it filled the room with the smell of wood smoke and something warm underneath it. Coffee, maybe, or dried herbs, the smell of a place that had been lived in for a long time. May stood just inside the door and breathed it in, and it was like breathing in something she had forgotten existed. Not luxury, not beauty, just safety. The plain, simple, overwhelming smell of a place where no one was going to hurt her. The children stood behind her in a row. Thomas was watching Daniel with careful eyes, measuring him the way you measure a stranger when you have learned the hard way that strangers are not always what they appear to be. Clara stayed close to May's side, one small hand tucked into the back of May's coat. Eli woke up when they came through the door and looked around with sleepy, confused eyes, and then he did something he had not done in days. He smiled, just a small one, barely there. But May saw it, and it hit her somewhere so deep and tender that she had to press her lips together and look away. It ain't much, Daniel said, hanging his coat by the door. But the roof holds and the fire keeps. You'll sleep warm. It's perfect, May said. Her voice broke on the second word, just slightly, just enough that she felt it. Daniel did not comment on it. He simply pointed toward the back room, where 2 beds sat side by side, and told the children to get out of their wet things. He found extra blankets from a chest by the wall and set them out without being asked, and then he went back to the kitchen and started a pot of something that began to smell like it had not been cooked by someone who knew what they were doing. May stood at the stove and watched him for exactly 3 seconds before she gently took the spoon from his hand. Let me, she said. He stepped aside without argument. That first night, the children slept in the back room, and May sat awake in a chair by the fire, listening. Every creak of the settling house made her sit up straighter. Every gust of wind against the shutters made her breath catch. Thomas sat up with her for a while, a short stick from the firewood pile, clutched in both hands, his jaw set. He'll find us, Thomas said quietly. It was not a question. May looked at her son, this 11-year-old boy with the old eyes, and her heart did something terrible and complicated. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. She wanted to say it with the kind of certainty that only mothers can produce, the absolute unshakable certainty that says you are safe and I will make sure of it no matter what it costs me. But Thomas had stopped believing easy comfort a long time ago. He would know if she lied. Not tonight, she said instead, and then she reached over and covered his hands with hers. Not tonight. He was asleep in his chair before midnight. May stayed awake till dawn. In the days that followed, May worked. She worked the way only a woman who has something to prove works, with her whole body and both hands and every waking hour. She cooked breakfast before the sun came up and had supper on the table before it went down. She swept and scrubbed and mended and organized. Her hands cracked and bled in the dry, cold air, and she barely noticed. The pain felt clean. It felt like purpose. Eli followed Daniel around the property like a small shadow. He asked questions constantly, in the way that 5-year-olds do, one after another without pause. Why is the horse that color? How does snow know when to fall? Why do your hands look like that? Daniel answered every single one. Sometimes short answers, sometimes longer ones. Always patient. May watched it from the kitchen window and pressed one hand flat against the glass because she did not know what else to do with the feeling that came over her. Clara helped May in the kitchen. She still did not speak, but she moved differently now, with a little more ease, a little less like she was trying to take up no space at all. She would stand beside May at the counter and hand her things before being asked for them. Flour, a spoon, the right pan, like she was learning the rhythm of this kitchen the way you learn a song, not with words but with your body. One evening, Daniel came in from the barn and stood by the fire to warm his hands, and without looking at May, he said quietly, "You're safe here. Whatever's behind you can't reach you here." May went very still. She stood at the sink with her back to him, and she did not move for a moment. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe him so badly that it ached. She did not say anything, but she held on to those words the rest of that night, turned them over and over in the dark when she couldn't sleep, like a smooth stone you carry in your pocket, because it makes you feel less afraid. 1 week later, the letter came. Daniel brought it in from the post in the morning. No name on the front. No return address. Just her name, written in handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. Handwriting she had spent years learning to dread the same way you learn to dread the sound of a particular storm. She took the letter from Daniel's hand and opened it. One line, just one line, but it was enough to make the whole room tilt sideways. I know exactly where you are. The letter slipped from her fingers. It fell to the floor and lay there between them. That single sentence face up, and the fire popped in the hearth, and outside the snow fell silently, and May could not breathe. "Who is looking for you?" Daniel asked. His voice was gentle, not accusing, just asking the only question that mattered. May's eyes filled. She had not planned to tell him. She had planned to keep the lie clean and simple. The dead husband's story, neat and done, and no more questions. But standing there in that warm kitchen with that letter on the floor between them and Daniel looking at her with eyes that held no judgment, just steady and quiet concern, the lie dissolved. "My husband," she whispered. "He is not dead. He is alive, and he is coming." Daniel did not step back. He did not change his expression. He stood exactly where he was and looked at her, and after a moment he said, "Then we make sure he doesn't get what he came for." That night the snow fell hard and heavy, and May sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else was asleep. Daniel checked the locks on the doors, then checked them again. He leaned his rifle by the front door, and he didn't say anything dramatic about it. He just put it there, quietly, matter-of-factly, the way you put an umbrella by the door when rain is coming. "He's not going to stop," May told him. "You don't know him. He doesn't stop." Daniel looked at her across the table. "Then neither do we," he said. The children felt the fear before May told them. Thomas began watching the windows the way he had watched the doors back home, that constant quiet surveillance that no child should ever have to do. Clara pressed herself closer to May's side. Even Eli, sweet, oblivious Eli, stopped bringing in little rocks to show Daniel and started staying closer to the house. May told them the truth. She sat them down and she looked at their faces, these three faces she loved more than her own life, and she told them, "Your father is looking for us, but he will not take you. I promise you with everything I have in me. He will not take you." Thomas's jaw went tight. He nodded once hard. "I won't let him either." That night, Daniel moved the children's beds into the main room and pushed the heavy table in front of the door. He showed Thomas where to go if things went wrong, which window, which direction to run, which neighbor's property was closest. "You listen," Daniel told him. "Not if you're scared. Not if it looks bad. Always. If I say run, you run. You take your brother and sister, and you do not look back." Thomas looked up at him with those two old eyes. "Yes, sir," he said. May stood in the doorway watching, and she pressed her fist against her mouth because the sound that wanted to come out of her was not something she could let herself make. 2 days later, the first rider appeared at the gate. "Are you still here? Because if you are, I need you to know something." May was not sleeping. She had not slept a full night in weeks. She was running on love and fear and the sheer force of a mother's refusal to let her children be taken back into that darkness. And now, through the snow, through the gray curtain of a winter morning, a man on horseback sat at the gate and just stared at the house. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He just watched. "Keep reading. This story is not done with you yet." The rider at the gate turned around and left. But that night, nailed to the fence post in the dark, there was another message. "You should have stayed." May read those words, and something happened in her that was not quite fear anymore. It was harder than fear, colder than fear. It was the look on a woman's face when she decides she is done being afraid and starts being something else entirely. Part 3 is coming, and you're going to want to be here for what happens next. May stood at the fence post with that note in her hand and the cold wind pressing against her face, and she read those 4 words, "You should have stayed," and she crumpled the paper in her fist. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were not. "He thinks fear will drive me back," she said. Her voice was low, almost to herself. Daniel stood beside her, watching her face. "It might," he said. "Not cruelly, just honestly. That's what he's counting on." May turned and looked at him. "Then he doesn't know me as well as he thinks he does." That night, they sat at the kitchen table, and Daniel told her they could run. Head north, find a different county, start over somewhere else. He would help her. He said it plainly and without conditions, the way good people offer help, like it cost him nothing even though it might cost him everything. May shook her head. He followed me across 2 states, she said. He will follow me across 10 more. Running is how I got here. It is not how I end this. The next morning brought something no one expected. A man rode up to the gate just after sunrise. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of face that had once been open and had since been closed by too many years of doing the wrong thing and knowing it. He dismounted slowly and stood at the gate with both hands raised, empty, and he waited. Daniel stepped onto the porch with his rifle. "My name is Warren," the man said. "I'm James Larkin's brother." May felt every muscle in her body go rigid. James Larkin, her husband's name, spoken out loud in broad daylight, hit her like cold water. Thomas, behind her, made a sound low in his throat, almost a growl. "Say what you came to say," Daniel said from the porch. His voice was flat and quiet, the way a man's voice gets when he is holding something very controlled. Warren swallowed. He looked at May directly. "James has a warrant," he said. "He has been telling people you took the children without cause. He paid a judge in the county over to make it official. He's coming with men. Some of them are wearing badges." The room behind May went utterly silent. She could feel Clara's small hand close around the fabric of her skirt. Thomas stepped forward. His voice cracked when it came out, somewhere between a boy's voice and a man's. "That's a lie." Warren flinched. He looked at the boy, and something passed over his face. Pain, maybe, or something close to it. "I know it is," Warren said. "I've watched him lie for 20 years. I've watched him hurt people, and I said nothing, and there's not a day I don't carry that." He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out papers, held them up. "I have names. Women he hurt before you. A neighbor who saw things. Letters. Signed statements. I've been collecting them for 2 years because I told myself someday I would have the courage to do something with them." May stared at him. "Why now?" she said. Her voice was cold. She could not help it. Warren met her eyes. "Because my nephew has a bruise on his face," he said quietly, "and I'm done pretending I don't see it." The silence stretched. May stepped down off the porch and walked to the gate and stood in front of this man, this brother who had watched and said nothing, and she looked at him for a long time, searching his face for the lie, finding, instead, something that looked terrifyingly like genuine remorse. She took the papers from his hand. She read through them slowly, right there in the cold, while Daniel watched from the porch and Thomas watched from the doorway, and the wind pulled at the pages. Name after name, story after story, women who had been where she was. Women who had been broken in ways some of them never recovered from. She read and she did not cry, but something in her chest cracked, wide, open like ice in spring, because she had spent years believing she was alone in this. Spent years believing that no one else knew, no one else saw, no one else would ever understand what it was to be afraid inside your own home. She was not alone. She had never been alone. "We can stop him," Warren said, "but not if you run. You have to stand." May folded the papers carefully. She looked up. Daniel was watching her from the porch. "This is your choice," he said. "I'll back whatever you decide." May thought about Eli's bruise. She thought about Clara's silence. She thought about Thomas and his old eyes and his tight jaw and the way he had been standing guard since he was old enough to understand he needed to. She thought about every version of herself that had ever made herself smaller to survive. Then she lifted her chin. "I'll fight," she said. The plan came together over 2 days. Warren knew where to find the other women. 2 of them, at least, who might be willing to come forward if May asked them herself. Daniel would stay at the ranch with the children. May and Warren would go. "I can't leave them," May said. Her voice broke on the words. "I can't." Daniel stepped close. He put his hands over hers, the way you hold something you're afraid to let go of. "You're not leaving them," he said. "You're going to save them. And I swear to you on everything I have left that they will be safe when you get back." She looked at him. This man she had known for less than a month. This quiet, steady, weathered man who had given her children warmth and her son a window to run to and her daughter a kitchen to stand in, who had checked the locks without being asked and loaded a rifle without making a scene and never once made her feel like she owed him anything for any of it. She believed him. Telling the children was the hardest thing she had done since the night she ran. "Benny," she said, using Eli's nickname, "come here," and Eli wrapped both arms around her neck so tightly she could barely breathe. Thomas stood straight and said nothing for a long time. Clara pressed something into her mother's hand, a small folded paper. May opened it to find a drawing, a house with smoke coming from the chimney and 4 stick figures standing out front and one larger one a little apart from the group. Beneath it, in Clara's careful letters, was written "Come back." May held that drawing against her chest. And then Clara, quiet Clara, who had not spoken since the night everything changed, looked up at her mother with wide brown eyes and said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Come back." The words fell on May like something holy. "I will," May said. "I swear I will." Stop for just a moment. Take a breath. Because Clara just spoke. After weeks of silence, that little girl looked her mother in the eyes and said, "Come back." And May drove away from that ranch in the snow with those 2 words carrying her forward. 2 words from a 7-year-old who had seen too much. 2 words that were bigger than any of the fear. I hope you're still here. Because May is about to find out that she was never as alone as she thought. May found the first woman in a small farmhouse at the edge of the county. Her name was Anna. When May knocked on the door and Anna opened it and saw her standing there in the snow, Anna went completely white and whispered, "I thought he had found you." "I found you," May said, "and I need your help." There was another woman. Finding her was harder, but what she carried was the heaviest thing of all. Part 4 is coming, and before it is over, someone is going to bleed. And it might not be who you think. Anna Hollister opened the door with shaking hands and stared at May like she was looking at something she had convinced herself could not exist. A woman who had gotten out. A woman who was still standing. "You are alive," Anna whispered. "Yes," May said, "and I need your voice." Anna cried when she told her story. She had to stop twice just to breathe. "Broken wrist," she said. "Covered it with a long sleeve for 3 months. Told everyone she fell from a horse." She had stopped leaving the house much after that, and when James Larkin moved away from the county and married someone new, Anna had let herself believe it was over for her, that she could just be quiet and invisible, and eventually the fear would stop visiting her in the night. "I'll testify," Anna said finally, "but only if I'm not standing up there alone." "You won't be," May told her. "I promise." The second woman, Sarah, was harder to find and harder still to reach. When May knocked on her door, Sarah took one look at her face and started to back away. She had to be asked twice before she would let them inside, and even then she stood close to the wall like she needed it behind her. "He killed my girl," Sarah said after a long time of silence. "My daughter." They said colic. They said it was just one of those things that sometimes happens to babies. But I was there, and I know what I saw, and nobody believed me. Nobody. She was weeping when she said it. That silent weeping that is somehow worse than any sound, the kind that has been practiced so many times in private that it no longer makes noise. May took her hands. "Help me stop him," May said. "Please, so no one else has to bury something that didn't have to be buried." Sarah's eyes went from hollow to hard in the space of a single breath. "I will," she said. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Daniel was holding the line. The second group of riders came 2 days after May left. For men this time, not just one watching from the gate. They rode up in the late afternoon when the light was thin and gray, and they were armed, and they were not trying to look like they weren't. "We have a lawful warrant," the lead man called out from the yard, "for a woman named May Larkin and her children." Daniel stood on the porch with his rifle across his arm. "No one here by that name," he said. The deputy smiled the way men smile when they think they already have you. "We followed her trail here." "Then you followed it wrong," Daniel said. "You're welcome to turn around and follow it somewhere else." There was a long moment where nobody moved. The air felt wound tight, like the last few turns of a clock spring before something gives way. Then one of the riders moved his hand toward his holster, and Daniel raised the rifle and fired once into the dirt 3 feet in front of the lead man's horse. The horse shied sideways, and the deputy grabbed the reins, and there was a lot of noise for a moment, and then quiet. "Leave," Daniel said. "Now." They left, but the deputy looked back over his shoulder before they cleared the gate, and what he said was not a bluff. This is not finished, Whitfield. Daniel sat down on the porch steps after the hoofbeats faded, and he sat there for a long time with his hands between his knees and his head down. Thomas came out after a few minutes and sat beside him without saying anything. Then Eli came and climbed directly into Daniel's lap, which was not something anyone asked him to do or told him to do. He simply climbed up and sat there, and Daniel put one arm around him and stared at the empty road. Clara stood in the doorway and watched them. She did not say anything, but she did not go back inside either. 3 nights after that, they came again, this time in the dark, and this time they were not interested in warrants. 2 shots fired from the tree line, both high, both wide, but close enough that Daniel shoved the children flat to the floor and returned fire into the dark and kept himself between those children and that door for the next 3 hours, not moving, barely breathing, until the silence settled back in and stayed. When May was told about it later, her voice would barely come. He took a wound in the upper arm during the second exchange. Not deep. A graze, he called it, the way men call things that are actually quite serious small names, so the people they are protecting don't have to be afraid. But the blood stained the snow outside the door, and Thomas found it in the morning and stood looking at it with his fists clenched at his sides. "You stayed," Thomas said to Daniel later, while they were bandaging the arm at the kitchen table. "You didn't leave." "I told your mama I wouldn't," Daniel said. Thomas looked at him for a long moment. He didn't say anything else. But something in his face changed, some final guard that had been up since long before May had run, some last locked door behind his eyes, and it opened. When May came back, she drove the wagon hard through the last stretch of road, and she was out of the seat before it had fully stopped, and she was holding her children, and she was weeping, and she did not try to stop it this time. She held them one by one, and then all 3 at once, and she just wept into their hair like she had been saving those tears for the entire journey, and only now felt safe enough to let them go. Then she pulled back and saw Daniel's arm. "What happened?" she said. He looked at her. "They tried," he said. "They failed." Her chin trembled. She pressed one hand to her mouth and looked away before she lost what little composure she still had. "He's in town," Daniel said after a moment. "Your husband. 3 miles away. He arrived this morning." May stood very still. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were clear. "Then this ends tomorrow," she said. "In the open. In front of everyone. No more running. No more hiding. No more." She had the women. She had Warren's papers. She had the truth, which is the one thing that has never needed anyone to carry it, because it carries itself. The question was whether anyone in that town was willing to hear it. "I need you to stay with me," because May just came home, and Daniel just said James was 3 miles away. 3 miles. After everything. After all of it. He was right there, close enough to finish this or close enough to finally be stopped. And May, with her 3 children and a wounded man at her side, and 2 frightened women willing to speak, and 1 guilty brother carrying papers full of names, she looked at the road ahead and said this ends tomorrow. Are you ready for what happens in that church? Keep reading. I promise you this is worth it. They went into town the next afternoon. They walked into that church, and the bell rang, and the people came. And then the door opened, and James Larkin walked in smiling, the way he always smiled, like he had already won, and everybody in the room just didn't know it yet. He was wrong. But before the night was over, he would put his hands on a child. Part 5 is the end, and it will cost you something. But I promise you, it is worth every word. The church was lit by oil lamps when May walked in, and the light they made was warm and golden, and it fell on the faces of the people who had come, some curious, some uneasy, some who had heard things over the years and chosen not to ask more. Pastor Holden had opened the doors without hesitation when May came to him that afternoon and told him what she needed. He listened. He looked at Anna's hands, which she held twisted together in her lap. He looked at Sarah's eyes, which were dry now, but hollowed out the way eyes get when they have been through something that leaves a mark. Then he said, "The doors will be open. Come at sunset." May stood at the front of that church, and she told the truth. She did not perform it. She did not raise her voice or lower it for effect. She simply said what happened, plainly and clearly from the beginning to the end, the way you tell a story when you have finally stopped being afraid of it. She spoke of a night she understood that love was not supposed to feel like this. She spoke of the years of making herself small. She spoke of Eli's bruise, and her voice went very quiet when she came to that part. And the silence in that church was the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that presses against your chest. Anna testified. Her voice shook for the first two sentences and then steadied. Sarah testified. She did not waver once. It was as though she had been waiting so long to be believed that now that the moment was here, she was going to make absolutely certain every word landed. Caroline, the young woman who had come to the ranch just the day before, who was engaged to James and had seen the stories proved true on her own face, stood up and spoke last before May. She was perhaps 22. Her hand shook, but her chin was level. "He is not what he tells people he is," she said, "and I will not pretend I don't know that anymore." Warren stepped forward and admitted, in front of everyone who knew his family name, that he had watched for years and said nothing, and that the weight of that silence was something he would carry for the rest of his life. The room was very quiet by the time he sat down, and then the doors at the back of the church opened. James Larkin walked in. He was dressed well. He was clean-shaven. He wore a small, confident smile, the smile of a man who believes the world will always arrange itself to his benefit, because up until now, it always had. He walked down the center aisle like he was expected, like he owned the room and everyone in it, like this was all just a small inconvenience that he would handle in his usual efficient way. "Hello, May," he said. His eyes swept the room. They landed briefly on Anna, on Sarah, on Warren, and May watched him calculate, watched him decide it was still manageable, watched the smile stay perfectly in place. Then his eyes found Thomas. "There's my boy," he said softly, and he moved, not toward May, toward Thomas, who was standing near the side of the room, and he moved fast, the way he always moved when he had decided something, and before anyone could react, he had his arm locked around Thomas's neck, and Thomas's feet were barely touching the ground, and the whole church lurched forward and went completely still. Clara screamed. Not a word, just a sound, high and raw, the first sound she had made in weeks that was not a whisper, and it cut through the church like a blade. "One step," James said, and his voice was the voice May had heard in her sleep for years, utterly calm, utterly in control, utterly certain. One step, and he doesn't breathe. May stepped forward. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. But her voice, when it came, was steady. "Take me," she said. "Let him go. Take me instead." James looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his face. The old satisfaction. The belief that she had finally come back to the right answer. He released Thomas and reached for May. And then the doors of the church exploded open. "Ezra Mallister," a voice rang out, deep and official and absolutely certain. A voice that carried the weight of something James Larkin had never had to face before. "This is a lawful arrest. Step away from the woman." Sheriff Dawson stepped through the door with 4 deputies behind him. Real ones. Men with badges that had not been paid for. James's smile finally broke. What followed lasted only minutes, but it felt like much longer. James lunged. Daniel tackled him. A knife came out of somewhere, and the lamplight caught it, and May grabbed a heavy wooden cross from the table beside her, and she swung it with everything she had, and James went down, and the knife went across the floor, and the deputies moved in, and there was a great deal of noise, and then, gradually, silence. James Larkin lay on the church floor with his hands being cuffed behind his back, blood from a cut on his temple darkening the floorboards, and the deputies pulling him upright. "It's over," Sheriff Dawson said. May stood in the middle of that church with the wooden cross still in her hands, and she looked at this man who had been the shape of all her fear for so many years, this diminished, bleeding, handcuffed man, and she felt something leave her body. Something she had been carrying so long she had forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. It was over. Thomas appeared beside her and pressed his face against her shoulder, and she held him with both arms, and she did not say anything because there was nothing left to say. Eli came running, and she caught him without looking and held him against her other side. Clara walked up slowly and put her arms around all of them and laid her head against May's back, and May felt her there, felt all 3 of them there, and she closed her eyes. The trial was 3 weeks later. The courtroom was full. People stood along the walls. Anna testified. Sarah testified. Caroline testified. Warren testified. May took the stand last of all. She did not cry. She did not speak too quickly or too slowly. She told the truth, and she let it do what truth does when it has enough room. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on every count. James Larkin was sentenced to life in prison. May stood on the courthouse steps afterward in the cold winter sun, and she took a long, slow breath, the first one in what felt like years that did not have fear underneath it. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because what May did, leaving in the night with 3 children and a thin blanket and nothing but desperate love to drive her forward, that was not weakness. That was the bravest thing a person can do. Choosing to live, choosing to fight, choosing to stand in front of a room full of people and say this is what happened, and I will not be quiet about it anymore. They went back to the ranch. Thomas stopped watching the door when he ate. Eli slept through the night for the first time in longer than May could remember, and when she came in to check on him in the morning, his face was so completely peaceful that she stood in the doorway for a full minute just looking at it. Clara spoke more. Not a flood of words all at once, but a slow, steady stream that grew stronger every day, like a river in the first warmth of spring remembering what it was made to do. One evening in the last week of winter, May stood on the porch and watched the sun go down, and Daniel came and stood beside her, and for a long time neither of them said anything, because some moments do not need words. "You don't have to stay," she said eventually. "You know that." Daniel looked at her. "I know," he said. "I want to." He went down on one knee right there on that porch in the last of the winter light with the sky going pink and orange above the snow, and he asked her. She said yes. They married in the yard when the first green showed through the snow. Just the family and Warren and Anna and Sarah and Pastor Holden. Clara picked wildflowers that were barely blooming yet and held them in a small bunch. Eli stood absolutely still for approximately 45 seconds before he grabbed Daniel's hand and held it for the rest of the ceremony. When it was done, Eli looked up at Daniel with those wide brown eyes. "Are you my papa now?" he asked. Daniel looked down at him. "If you wanted to be," he said. Eli said, "I do," very solemnly and very immediately, and there was a sound for the people standing there, a collective soft exhale, the kind that comes when something tender happens that you were not expecting. Thomas walked forward and extended his hand to Daniel. A man's handshake, deliberate and serious. "Thank you," Thomas said, "for keeping your promise." Daniel shook his hand. Clara reached over and slipped her small fingers into Daniel's other hand without a word. She just held on. May watched them. Her husband, her children, this family she had nearly had to die to reach, standing in a yard full of thin winter sunlight, and she pressed one hand flat against her chest because the feeling there was almost too much to hold. That night she slept without listening for footsteps, without flinching at the wind, without waiting for something terrible to find her in the dark. The door was locked. The children were warm. The man beside her was one who had chosen to stay. And outside, slowly, quietly, winter was ending. Not with a crash, not with drama, just with the slow return of light. The way it always ends. The way warmth always finds its way back, even after the longest and coldest of storms. May Larkin had run to save her life. And in doing so, she had finally found it.